Good morning. This is Megan Herbst with the Stearns Conservation District with your Conservation Report. Today I want to talk about a recent news article that was released by University of Minnesota Extension Nutrient Management Specialist Dan Kaiser. Mr. Kaiser recently finished a 4-year study on potassium fertilizer application for corn and soybeans. The study aimed to determine the optimal K rate for both crops, assess if spring application of potash negatively impacts soybean yield, potentially due to too much chloride, and evaluate the accuracy of current plant tissue and soil testing guidelines. The study was conducted from 2022 through 2025 at 6 trial locations around Minnesota with various soil types and was funded by Minnesota's fertilizer tonnage fee through the Agricultural Fertilizer Research and Education Council. Rates were tested from 0 to 160 pounds of potash per acre in both the fall and the spring. Researchers targeted locations with those low soil test K levels, specifically those testing at 150 part per million or less, to ensure there was a crop response to the fertilizer. Some key takeaways from the study are that the potash timing did not impact corn yield. Maximum corn yield was still achieved with an application rate of 80 to 120 pounds of potash per acre across locations when applied either in the fall or in the spring. However, the same could not be said for the soybean yield, which was slightly lower when potash was applied in the spring compared to the fall. On average, spring application resulted in 1 bushel per acre less than fall application. Yield decreased when 80 pounds of potash or more was applied directly ahead of soybean planting in the spring. The spring applied potash led to much higher chloride levels in the soybean tissue, often double the levels of the fall applied K. This excessive chloride uptake is the primary suspect for the spring yield penalty. Fall application allows for winter and spring moisture to leach the chloride deeper into the soil profile before the soybean roots reach it, while keeping the potassium available in the root zone. So, the key takeaway there is that farmers should be careful to avoid over-fertilizing soybeans in the spring. Also, while there was a relationship between the K base saturation ratio and yield, it offered no advantage over standard June soil test K levels for predicting performance. Standard soil testing still remains the most practical and effective way to manage potassium. So what does this mean for the farmer? The study's findings align very closely with the current U of M fertilizer guidelines for corn, effectively validating them for modern production. The 80 to 120 pound range identified in the research could provide a narrower, more optimized target within those broader guidelines to ensure growers aren't over-applying while still hitting maximum yield. Corn growers can be flexible in their potassium fertilizer application timing, so again in the fall or in the spring. The research suggests that for soybeans, fall application is better to reduce the potential risk for yield reductions. However, if you must apply in the spring, keeping rates below 100 pounds of potash per acre to avoid yield drag is a good idea. However, if your soil test shows K is low or very low, you should still apply the suggested rates. So what should you do if your soil test calls for a high rate of potassium, more than 80 pounds of potash for soybeans? Your options are to either A, get the potash down in the fall to mitigate the chloride risk, or B, apply the majority of the K ahead of the corn in the rotation, since corn doesn't suffer that same spring yield penalty from chloride, and then the soybeans will benefit from the residual K the following year. For more information on this topic and other current nutrient management topics, I definitely recommend that you check out the blog by searching in your browser for University of Minnesota Extension Minnesota Crop News. Secondly, I also want to congratulate Sartell St. Stephen High School for their excellent job at the Minnesota State Envirothon competition on May 18th at the Oliver Kelly Farm in Elk River. The Envirothon is a competition where students are tested in wildlife, wetlands, soils, forestry, and a current events topic, as well as an oral presentation. And Sartell advanced from our Area 2 competition back in April. They went on to compete at the state competition, like I said, in Elk River on May 18th, and they took 3rd place across the state. So we definitely look forward to watching them compete in future years at the Envirothon. So a big congratulations to Sartell St. Stephen High School, their students, and their coach. And that's all for me today. If you have any questions or comments about any of the things I talked about, please contact the Stearns Conservation District at 320-251-7800 or check us out online at www.stearnscountyswcd.net. Have a wonderful weekend. This has been Megan Herbst with the Stearns Conservation District with your Conservation Report.